You really think you belong here? My father laughed, swirling his expensive red wine, while my sister whispered loud enough for the next table to hear that I smelled like pig manure. The restaurant manager approached us, his face stern, and my brother-in-law Julian smirked, expecting me to be kicked out onto the street. Instead, the manager bowed low and said, "Welcome back, Miss Nia. Your usual table is ready." Dad choked on his wine, and Julian dropped his fork. I am Nia, 35 years old, and that was the moment my family realized they were just guests in my world. Before I tell you how I fired my brother-in-law from his own company, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the black sheep of a family that only cared about status and money. It started 20 minutes earlier at El Obsidian, the most exclusive French restaurant in the city. I walked in wearing my worn-out work jeans and heavy boots, still carrying the rich scent of the earth from my morning inspection. The crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, and the white tablecloths were pristine, but I felt comfortable here. This was my sanctuary, even if nobody knew it yet. However, the moment I pulled out the velvet chair at my family's table, the atmosphere changed instantly. My brother-in-law Julian, a hedge fund manager, who thinks a good day is destroying a small company, wrinkled his nose the moment I sat down. He pulled a silk handkerchief from his pocket and pressed it dramatically against his face. "Oh God, Nia," he said loud enough to stop the conversation at the table behind us. "Did you just swim through a septic tank on your way here, or is that just your natural scent now? The smell is absolutely unbearable." I sat down, ignoring the shocked stares of the waiter standing nearby. "I just came from the North Field," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. "We are harvesting the black winter truffles today, and the soil conditions have to be monitored perfectly. It is a delicate process, Julian." My father Desmond shook his head, his face twisting in that familiar look of deep disappointment he has reserved for me since I dropped out of law school 10 years ago. "Mushrooms," he scoffed, putting down his menu with force. "You are 35 years old, Nia. Look at your sister Bianca. She is wearing Prada. She is married to a finance director. And you are playing in the dirt like a 5-year-old child. You are embarrassing me in front of Julian. Do you know how hard it was to get a reservation here?" I looked at my hands resting on the white tablecloth. Yes, there was dark soil under my fingernails. Soil that was worth more than Julian's entire Italian suit. Before I could explain that the truffle harvest I just inspected was worth $2 million, my sister Bianca reached into her designer purse. She pulled out a bottle of Chanel No. 5 and, without asking, sprayed a thick cloud of mist directly into my face. "Cover that up," she said, crinkling her nose in disgust as the chemical scent filled my lungs. "You smell like poverty, Nia. It is ruining my appetite, and I need to take photos for Instagram. I cannot have you looking like a gardener in the background of my life." The mist burned my eyes, but I did not blink. I did not cry. I just watched them. My family. The people who I had secretly been supporting for years without them knowing. The people who were eating at my restaurant, drinking wine from my vineyards, and sitting on chairs I paid for. Julian raised his hand, snapping his fingers aggressively at the passing waiter. "Garçon," he called out with a terrible arrogance. "We need a different table immediately, or at least bring a partition to put between us and this woman. I cannot eat my Wagyu beef sitting next to a farm animal. It is unsanitary, and frankly, it is insulting to customers of my caliber." The waiter stopped in his tracks, looking from Julian's red, angry face to my muddy boots. I saw the flash of recognition in the waiter's eyes. He knew exactly who I was. He knew I signed his paychecks. But Julian was just getting started, and he had no idea he was digging his own grave. The waiter hesitated, his eyes darting between Julian's aggressive posture and my calm demeanor. He knew exactly who signed his paychecks, and he knew that I owned the building we were standing in. But before he could open his mouth to defend me, Julian reached into his Italian suit pocket and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. He shoved it directly into the waiter's vest pocket with a condescending pat on the chest. "Fix this," Julian commanded, his voice dripping with entitlement. "Move us to the back corner near the kitchen. Put her against the wall where the shadows are darkest. I do not want her ruining the aesthetic of my celebration dinner." The waiter froze, looking at me with panic in his eyes. I gave him a barely perceptible nod, a silent command to play along. I wanted to see exactly how far my family would go. I wanted them to dig their hole so deep that they would never be able to climb out. Understanding my signal, the waiter bowed stiffly and led us to a cramped table right next to the swinging service doors. The air here was hotter and smelled faintly of dish soap and old grease, but my family looked relieved. "Perfect," Bianca said, smoothing her silk dress as she sat down as far away from me as possible. "Now, nobody has to look at her boots. You are doing us a favor, staying in the shadows, Nia." I pulled out the heavy leather-bound chair and sat down. My father Desmond sat opposite me, refusing to make eye contact. He was too busy admiring the gold light fixtures to notice his daughter was being treated like an unwanted stray dog. When the waiter returned to distribute the menus bound in rich mahogany leather, I reached out to take one. I wanted to see if the new seasonal truffle risotto I approved last week had made it onto the print. But before my fingers could graze the cover, Julian's hand shot across the table and snatched it away. "Don't bother, Nia," he sneered, placing the menu under his own elbow like he was confiscating a toy from a toddler. "It is all in French. You would not understand the difference between foie gras and a hamburger anyway. Besides, looking at prices you cannot afford will just make you depressed. I will order for you. The chicken breast is dry and tasteless, so it should suit your palate perfectly." I folded my hands on the table, feeling the cold anger rising in my chest. If only he knew that I spoke fluent French, having spent 3 summers in Bordeaux studying viticulture. If only he knew that I wrote the menu he was currently holding. But I remained silent, watching him scan the wine list with a theatrically critical eye. "We need something exceptional to celebrate my merger," Julian announced, loud enough for the tables nearby to hear. He ran his finger down the reserve list, skipping past the hundreds and landing on the thousands. "Ah, here it is. The Vanguard Reserve 2018, $5,000 a bottle." My father gasped, choking slightly on his water. $5,000, Julian. "Is that necessary?" "Absolutely," Julian replied, leaning back and expanding his chest. "This is what success tastes like, Desmond. You have to pay for quality. This is a very rare vintage." The waiter brought the bottle, cradling it like a newborn baby. He presented the label to Julian, but his eyes flickered to me for a split second. It was a black bottle with gold lettering that simply read, "Vanguard." My heart did a little flip. That was my baby. I remembered the 2018 harvest vividly. It was the year I almost lost the entire crop to a sudden frost in Napa Valley, but we saved it by burning controlled fires between the vines for 3 nights straight. The result was a smoky, complex Cabernet that won double gold in international competitions. Julian swirled the glass, pretending to inspect the legs of the wine. He took a sip and closed his eyes, making a show of being a connoisseur. "Exquisite," he declared. "You can really taste the terroir of the south of France. This comes from the Bordeaux region, right on the coast. You can taste the salty sea air in the grapes. It was harvested during the Great Drought of 2018, which is why the flavor is so concentrated. Nia, you should drink your water. You would not appreciate a European masterpiece like this." I looked at him. I looked at the bottle that I designed. I looked at the wine that I grew with my own hands on American soil. The ignorance was too much to bear. It was one thing to insult me, but it was another thing to insult my craft. "Actually," I said, my voice cutting through the hum of the restaurant, "it is not from France, Julian. It is from Napa Valley, California. And there was no drought in 2018. It rained for 3 weeks straight before the harvest, which is why we had to pick the grapes at night to preserve the acidity. That smokiness you taste isn't sea air. It is from the frost fires we lit to save the vines." The table went dead silent. Bianca stopped typing on her phone. My father looked up from his plate. Julian slowly lowered his glass, his face turning a shade of red that matched the wine. He set the glass down with a heavy clink that sounded like a gunshot. He looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. His ego had just been bruised by the woman he considered beneath him. He slammed his open palm onto the table, causing the silverware to jump and the candle to flicker wildly. "You dare lecture me!" he hissed, his voice shaking with rage. "You dare correct me about a $5,000 bottle of wine when you can barely afford the gas to drive your truck here? Who do you think you are, Nia?" The silence stretched tight across the table like a rubber band ready to snap. Julian was glaring at me, waiting for an answer. But before I could speak, my sister Bianca decided she had to save her husband from his own embarrassment. I watched her hand move across the table with calculated precision. She reached for the silver breadbasket, but her elbow jutted out sharply, knocking into Julian's full glass of the $5,000 Cabernet. The glass tipped over in slow motion. The dark red liquid splashed violently across the chest of Julian's pristine white dress shirt, blooming outward like a fresh gunshot wound. It dripped down his front, splashing onto his expensive leather loafers and staining the white tablecloth, blood red. "Oh my God!" Bianca shrieked, leaping back and pressing her hands to her mouth in a performance worthy of an Academy Award. "Nia, look what you did. You kicked the table leg with your clumsy boots. You made me spill it." I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, had not moved a muscle. My feet were nowhere near the table leg, but facts did not matter. In my family, only the narrative did, and the narrative was always that I was the problem. Julian jumped up from his chair, his face twisting into a mask of pure fury. He looked down at his ruined shirt, his hands shaking. "Do you have any idea what you have just done?" he shouted, his voice cracking. "This is custom Italian silk. This shirt alone costs $800. That is probably more than you make in an entire month. Digging in the dirt, you ruin everything you touch." He grabbed a cloth napkin and began frantically dabbing at the stain, making it worse. The red wine set into the fibers instantly. My father. Desmond slammed his hand on the table again, his face purple with rage. He did not ask what happened. He did not look at the distance between my legs and the table. He simply accepted Bianca's lie because it was easier than admitting his golden child was clumsy or malicious. "You are a disgrace, Nia." My father spat out, his voice dripping with venom. "We bring you to a nice place. We try to include you in civilized society, and this is how you repay us, by destroying Julian's property, by humiliating us." I looked at my father calmly. "I did not kick the table." "Dad?" Bianca knocked it over because she wanted to change the subject. "Do not lie to me," my father roared, pointing a trembling finger at the floor. "I want you to fix this right now. Get down on your knees." I stared at him. "Excuse me?" I asked quietly. I said, "Get down on your knees." My father repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous hiss. "Use your napkin and wipe the wine off Julian's shoes. They are crocodile leather and the acid will ruin them. Show some respect for the people who are better than you. Show some remorse for once in your pathetic life." The restaurant had gone deadly silent. Every diner within earshot had stopped eating. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. All eyes were on our table. A woman at the next table looked at me with pity, but she did not say anything. Nobody ever says anything. I looked at the floor. I looked at Julian's wine, soaked shoes, and then I looked at my father. "No," I said. My father looked like he was about to stroke out. "What did you say to me?" "I said no," I replied, my voice steady and clear. "I did not spill the wine. I will not kneel, and I will not clean his shoes. I am not your servant, Dad." "You ungrateful little wretch," my father hissed, standing up and raising his hand as if he might strike me, right there in the middle of the dining room. "Get out. Get out of my sight before I call the police and have you dragged out." Suddenly a heavy shadow fell over our table. The air shifted, becoming colder. The sound of heavy, authoritative footsteps stopped right beside me. I looked up to see Monsieur Laurent, the general manager, standing there. He was a tall, imposing man in an impeccable tuxedo with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. He had seen everything from across the room. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, looking down at the chaotic scene. The spilled wine, the shouting man and the woman being told to kneel. My family froze. The color drained from my father's face. He suddenly realized that his loud behavior was attracting the wrong kind of attention. He assumed, as he always did, that authority figures were on his side, but he also knew that high-end restaurants did not tolerate scenes. He immediately switched into his charming persona, though his voice was still breathless with panic. "Oh, sir, I am so sorry," my father stammered, gesturing frantically at me. "We are having a bit of a domestic issue. This woman here, she is barely civilized. She forced her way onto our table and caused this mess. We were just telling her to leave. We do not know her really. She is just a distant relative. We tried to help, but you know how these people are." Bianca nodded vigorously, clutching Julian's arm. "Yes, please remove her. She is disturbing the other guests. She clearly does not belong here. Look at her clothes, she is ruining the atmosphere." Julian puffed out his chest, trying to look important despite the wine stain. "I am a VIP customer here," he announced. "I demand you throw this woman out immediately. She destroyed my suit." Monsieur Laurent did not look at Julian, he did not look at Bianca, and he certainly did not look at my father. His icy blue gaze was fixed solely on me. His expression was unreadable, stern and serious. He took one step forward, closing the distance between us. My father smirked triumphantly, thinking he had won, thinking I was about to be humiliated and tossed onto the street like trash. He thought he was saving his reputation. Monsieur Laurent took a deep breath and opened his mouth to speak, but he did not speak to them. He spoke to me, and what he was about to say would shatter their reality forever. Monsieur Laurent stopped directly in front of our table, and the air seemed to leave the room. My father was already halfway out of his seat, trembling slightly as he prepared to apologize for my existence. He started babbling about how they were respectable people, and I was just an unfortunate disruption to their evening. Julian was practically preening, checking his reflection in his spoon, confident that his complaint had been heard and that justice was about to be served in the form of my expulsion. He looked at me with a triumphant sneer, waiting for the security guards to appear and drag me away. Then it happened. Monsieur Laurent did not look at my father. He did not look at Julian. He turned his body squarely toward me and bent at the waist in a movement so fluid and practiced it looked like a dance. It was a perfect 90-degree bow. A gesture of supreme respect reserved for royalty or heads of state, not for women wearing muddy boots in a five-star dining room. "Welcome back, Madame Nia Laurent," said his voice smooth as silk and carrying just enough volume for the entire section to hear. "It has been too long since you graced us with your presence. We have missed you. We have kept your private crate of the Vanguard Reserve 2018 in the climate-controlled cellar just as you instructed. The sommelier is ready to decant a bottle for your guests if you wish. Or would you prefer we bring the tasting menu directly to the private suite upstairs away from the noise?" The sound of a metal fork hitting the fine china plate echoed like a gunshot in the sudden silence. Julian's mouth hung open, his jaw practically touching his wine-stained chest. His eyes were bulging almost comically as his brain tried to process what he had just heard. Bianca stopped mid-breath, her phone forgotten in her hand, her thumb hovering over the record button. My father looked as if he had been slapped across the face with a wet fish. The silence was absolute. For 10 seconds nobody moved. It was the most beautiful silence I had ever heard. It was the sound of their reality cracking down the middle. I looked at Laurent and gave him a small smile. "Thank you, Laurent," I said calmly, keeping my voice steady, despite the adrenaline racing through my veins. "But I think my family prefers the view of the kitchen door. We are fine here." Laurent bowed again, lower this time. "As you wish, madame. Let me know if you require anything at all." "Anything." He turned on his heel and walked away, leaving a wake of stunned confusion behind him. I picked up my water glass and took a slow sip, watching my family over the rim. I could see the gears turning in Julian's head. I could see the panic rising behind his eyes, followed quickly by the desperate need to rationalize what he had just seen. There was no way in his narrow world that I could be important. There was no way the sister-in-law he called a peasant commanded this level of respect from a man like Laurent. It broke his entire worldview. So he found the only explanation his small mind could accept. He had to lower me to make himself feel tall again. He leaned in close to my father, shielding his mouth with his hand, but making sure I could still hear him. "Did you see that, Desmond?" he whispered, his voice dripping with malice and desperation. "Did you see how he looked at her? I knew she was desperate for money, but I did not think she would stoop this low." My father blinked, confused, still staring at the retreating back of the manager. "What do you mean, Julian?" he asked, his voice trembling. Julian smirked, casting a disgusting look at me. "It is obvious, isn't it?" he hissed. "Look at him. He is an old man. Look at her. She is young and clearly needs cash. She must be sleeping with him. That is the only reason a manager treats a nobody like a queen. It is a transactional relationship, Desmond. Your daughter is trading her dignity for free wine and special treatment." Bianca gasped, pretending to be scandalized, but I saw the gleam of excitement in her eyes. "Oh my God," she whispered, covering her mouth with her manicured hand. "Nia is a sugar baby. That is so gross. I bet she cleans more than just his house to get free wine. That explains why she has been so secretive about her job. She is not a farmer, she is an escort." My father's face hardened. The confusion was gone, replaced by a new wave of judgment. He looked at me with renewed disgust, not because I was poor, but because he thought I was immoral. He shook his head slowly, looking at me like I was something he had stepped in. Julian sat up straighter. He had his narrative now. He felt superior again. He picked up his napkin and wiped his mouth, feeling like he had solved the puzzle. He looked at me with a smirk that made me want to scream. He wanted to hurt me. He wanted to put me back in my place beneath his heel. "Well, Nia," he announced, his voice booming through the quiet restaurant so that everyone could hear his verdict. "I suppose we should not judge. Times are hard and everyone has to make a living somehow, even if it is shameful." He paused for dramatic effect, waiting until the diners at the next table were looking at us again. "Being a mistress to an old restaurant manager is a job too, right, Nia? Does he pay you in leftovers, or do you actually get cash for your services?" Julian was still smiling at his own crude joke about my morality when the heavy double doors of the kitchen swung open with a bang that silenced the room. Out stepped Chef Jean-Pierre. He is a legend in the culinary world, a man with 3 Michelin stars and a temper that makes grown men cry. He was wearing his pristine white chef whites and pushing a silver serving cart himself, something that was unheard of for a man of his stature. Usually he remained hidden in the kitchen, orchestrating his brigade like a general. But tonight he was on the floor. Julian straightened his tie and shot a smug look at my father. Finally he whispered loud enough for me to hear. "The chef is coming to apologize personally for the terrible service and for putting us next to the kitchen. He probably wants to offer me a complimentary bottle to make up for the distress. Watch and learn, Nia. This is how men of influence are treated." My sister Bianca quickly pulled out her compact mirror to check her lipstick, preparing herself to be charmed by a celebrity chef. My father sat up straighter, expecting the deference he believed he was owed. They all wore expressions of expectant arrogance, waiting for the apology. But Jean-Pierre did not stop at the head of the table where Julian sat. He did not bow to my father. He walked straight past them, as if they were invisible furniture, and stopped the cart directly in front of me. The smell of caramelized figs and rich seared meat wafted from under the silver cloche. Jean-Pierre did not look happy. He looked intense. He lifted the silver dome with a flourish, revealing a plate of foie gras with a balsamic reduction that looked more like art than food. He ignored the rest of my family completely and looked me dead in the eye. Madame, he said, his voice thick with a French accent. The new shipment arrived this morning from the Hudson Valley farm just as you requested. I prepared this myself using the new technique we discussed. Please, I need your opinion on the texture. The heir left the table. My father looked confused, glancing from the chef to me and back again. Julian, however, turned a shade of purple that clashed horribly with the wine stain on his shirt. He could not stand it. He could not stand being ignored, and he certainly could not stand the idea that the chef sought the opinion of a woman he considered a peasant. Before I could pick up my fork, Julian reached across the table with his own dirty fork and stabbed a large piece of the delicate liver. He shoved it into his mouth, chewing aggressively and making a show of analyzing it. He swallowed hard and slammed his fork down on the table, making the glasses jump. "It is dry," Julian announced loudly, waving his hand dismissively at the chef. "It is completely overcooked. I have had better foie gras at the airport lounge. This is rubbery and tasteless. Honestly, I am disappointed. Is this really the best a 3-star chef can do? I expected excellence, but this is mediocre at best." He looked around the table, waiting for agreement. Bianca nodded eagerly, even though she had not tasted it. My father murmured his agreement, desperate to align himself with Julian's opinion. Jean-Pierre's eyes narrowed into slits. The veins in his neck stood out. He opened his mouth to shred Julian to pieces, but I raised my hand slightly, stopping him. I turned to look at my brother-in-law. "It is not dry, Julian," I said, my voice calm and clinical, cutting through his bluster. "It is a torchin preparation. It is not seared in a pan like a steak. It is wrapped in cloth and poached in a court bouillon at exactly 125 degrees for 40 minutes. That specific temperature preserves the fat content without rendering it out." I picked up my knife and cut a small slice, revealing the perfect pink interior. The texture you are complaining about is actually the hallmark of grade A liver. If it were any softer, it would mean the animal was stressed before slaughter. If it were any harder, it would be overcooked. This is technically perfect. The acidity you taste is not bad. Cooking. It is a 25-year-old balsamic vinegar from Modena, meant to cut through the richness. You would know that if you actually knew anything about food, instead of just pretending to be an expert to soothe your fragile ego. Julian froze. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air. He had tried to use his wealth to bully the room, but he had just been dismantled by superior knowledge. Jean-Pierre let out a short, sharp laugh. He looked at Julian with pure disdain, and then turned back to me with a warm smile. "Precisely, madame," he said, bowing his head slightly. "It takes a truly sophisticated palate to understand the nuance of perfection. I am relieved to see that at least one person at this table has taste. Enjoy your meal, madame." He turned and marched back toward the kitchen, leaving Julian staring at his plate, his face burning with humiliation. My father looked down at his lap, unable to meet my eyes. Julian gripped his steak knife so hard his knuckles turned white. I could see the vein in his temple throbbing. He had been humiliated by the manager and now the chef. He was running out of people to blame, and his anger was focusing entirely on me. "You think you are so smart, don't you?" Julian hissed through gritted teeth, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "You memorized a few fancy words from a cooking show, and you think that makes you better than me. You are nothing, Nia. You are a fraud, and I am going to expose you." Julian leaned back in his chair and let out a cold, hard laugh that did not reach his eyes. He had just been humiliated by a chef regarding the texture of liver. But Julian was a man who knew how to pivot. If he could not win on taste, he would win on power. He knew that in the real world, money was the only language that mattered, and he was convinced he spoke it better than anyone else at the table. He reached down beside his chair and lifted a heavy leather briefcase onto the table, pushing aside the fine crystal glasses and the silver cutlery with a deliberate lack of respect. "You may have tricked the chef with some memorized trivia from a magazine, Nia, but that does not change reality," Julian said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone that he used in boardrooms to intimidate junior analysts. "You are still just a laborer. You play in the mud while I move mountains. You think your little farm matters. You think your connection to this restaurant matters. It is adorable, really. But you have no idea what is coming. He clicked the gold latches of his briefcase open with a loud snap that echoed in the quiet dining room. He pulled out a thick document bound in a blue folder and slammed it onto the table directly in front of my plate. "Do you see this?" he asked, tapping the cover with his index finger. "This is the future. This is the deal of the century. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock I am signing a merger that will make my hedge fund the most powerful financial entity in the state. We are being acquired by a massive conglomerate that is looking to monopolize the entire hospitality supply chain in the Northeast." My father sat up straight, his eyes wide with greed and admiration. "Is this it, Julian?" my father asked breathlessly. "Is this the big deal you have been working on for 6 months?" "It is," Julian replied, puffing out his chest. "After tomorrow, I will not just be a manager. I will be the vice president of regional operations. And do you know what the first thing I am going to do is, Nia?" I looked at him calmly, my hands resting on my lap. I had a feeling he was going to tell me, regardless of whether I asked. "I am going to audit the supply chain of every high-end restaurant in this city," Julian hissed, leaning in closer, his eyes burning with malice. "As the new vice president, I will have the authority to approve or deny every vendor contract. And I am going to make it my personal mission to ensure that your little farm never sells another mushroom or another grape in this town again. I will label your produce as substandard. I will flag your farm for health violations. I will bury you in so much red tape and litigation that you will be forced to sell your land for pennies just to buy groceries." Bianca let out a cruel little giggle. "Oh, Julian, that is brilliant," she said. "Then she can finally get a real job. Maybe she can work as a maid. I am looking for someone to clean our new house." Julian smiled, soaking in the adoration of my foolish sister and my delusional father. He tapped the document again. "This is the end of your little hobby, Nia. I am going to crush you like a bug. And there is nothing you can do about it because this company is too big to fight." I looked down at the document. Embossed in gold leaf on the dark blue cover was a logo I knew very well. It was a stylized shield with 2 large interlocking letters in the center, N and G. Below the letters were the words NG Holdings International. I felt a bubble of laughter rising in my throat, but I pushed it down. It was almost too perfect. Julian was bragging about being acquired by my own holding company. He was threatening to fire me using the power that I was about to grant him. He had absolutely no idea that the signature required to validate this entire merger was mine. I reached out and traced the gold letters with my finger. The paper felt expensive. I remembered choosing this specific cardstock when my legal team presented the branding options 3 years ago. NG Holdings, I said softly, reading the name aloud. "That is a very impressive organization, Julian. They are known for their ethical business practices and their ruthless elimination of incompetent management. Are you sure you are a good fit for them?" Julian snatched the folder away from my hand as if my touch would contaminate it. "Don't you dare touch it," he snapped. "You do not get to speak their name. You are not on their level. They chose me because I am a visionary. They need someone with a killer instinct to clean up the market." I looked him dead in the eye. It was time to give him one last chance to realize the cliff he was standing on. One last chance to see the truth before gravity took over. "Tell me, Julian," I asked, keeping my voice deceptively light. "Do you have any idea what NG stands for? Have you ever met the founder?" Julian rolled his eyes, leaning back and crossing his arms over his wine-stained shirt. "Who cares what it stands for?" he scoffed dismissively. "It probably stands for New Generation or Next Global or something generic like that. And no, I have not met the owner. The owner is a silent billionaire who lives in the shadows. Probably some old white guy on a yacht in the Mediterranean who does not have time to deal with the day-to-day operations." That is why he hired me. To run the empire while he counts his money. Why do you ask, Naya? Do you think you know something I don't? Do you think your little farmer brain can comprehend high finance? He laughed again, and my father joined in, shaking his head at my stupidity. They were so confident, so sure of their place in the world. I smiled a slow, dangerous smile. Because NG does not stand for New Generation Julian, and the owner is definitely not an old white man on a yacht. Oh, please stop it with the boring business talk, Bianca chirped, her voice grating like fingernails on a chalkboard. She clearly sensed that Julian was losing the upper hand, and she decided to intervene in the only way she knew how, by making everything about herself. She shoved her left hand aggressively across the table, nearly knocking over the water pitcher. Focus on something that actually matters, Nia. Look at this. On her finger sat a diamond ring that was admittedly large but completely lacking in taste. It was a 5-carat cushion cut, set in a band so encrusted with smaller stones that it looked more like a disco ball than a piece of jewelry. It caught the light of the crystal chandelier and sent fractured beams dancing across the white tablecloth. Bianca wiggled her fingers, mesmerizing herself with the sparkle. Julian bought this for me yesterday to celebrate the merger, she announced, her eyes gleaming with greed. It is custom made. The jeweler said it is the clearest stone he has seen in years. But I suppose you would not know anything about quality, would you? She dropped her hand onto the table next to mine, making a deliberate comparison. Her hand was manicured to perfection, with long gel nails painted a soft baby pink, and skin that had never seen a day of hard labor. Beside it, my hand looked rough. My nails were short and practical, and despite my scrubbing, there were faint traces of soil etched into my fingerprints. To her, it looked like failure. To me, it looked like the work that built an empire. 35 years old, Nia, Bianca sighed, tilting her head with mock sympathy. And look at your hands. They are empty. No ring, no husband, no prospect of a future. I guess it makes sense, though. No man of status wants to hold a hand that is permanently stained with manure. You smell like dirt, and you look like yesterday's laundry. It is honestly embarrassing to sit next to you. I looked at the ring on her finger. It sparkled violently, trying so hard to be noticed. It reminded me of something, but not in the way she intended. It is a very large ring, Bianca, I said, quietly ignoring her insults about my marital status. It must have cost a fortune. It reminds me of Mom's sapphire necklace. Do you remember that one? The deep blue pendant with the platinum chain. She wore it to every anniversary dinner until she got sick. Bianca rolled her eyes, pulling her hand back to admire it herself. Who cares about that old thing? It was vintage. This is modern. This is success. I cared, I said, my voice hardening slightly. I cared about it a lot. I remember holding it in my hands 10 years ago, standing in a pawn shop on 4th Street. I remember the smell of stale cigarettes and desperation in that shop. I remember crying as the broker weighed it on his scale. Julian let out a scoff. Oh God, here we go with the sob stories. Can we not enjoy one meal without you bringing up the past? I ignored him, keeping my eyes locked on my sister. I sold that necklace for $3,000, Bianca. It was the only thing of value Mom left me. And do you remember what I did with the money? Bianca picked up her wine glass, looking bored. I don't know, Nia. You probably wasted it on rent for some terrible apartment. I gave it to you, I said firmly. I handed you every single cent in a cash envelope. It was for your first semester tuition at State University. I sold my inheritance so you could have a future. I thought I was investing in your education so you could become a lawyer like you promised Mom. Bianca laughed, a cruel, hollow sound. Oh, get over it. College was boring and the dorms were disgusting. I was meant for bigger things. I was scouted for modeling that very next week. You were scouted for an Instagram promotion scam, Bianca, I countered. You dropped out after 3 weeks and spent the remaining tuition money on a trip to Cabo with a DJ named Spark. You wasted Mom's legacy on a tan that faded in a month. And now you sit here wearing a ring paid for by fraud, mocking the hands that fed you. Enough, Nia, my father, Desmond roared, slamming his palm against the table. The cutlery jumped and people turned to stare again, but he didn't care. He was red in the face, furious that I dared to tarnish his golden child. Stop attacking your sister, he spat, pointing a shaking finger at me. You are just jealous. Look at her. She is beautiful. She is radiant. She knows how to present herself to the world. She is the face of this family, Nia. She brings us prestige. He looked at me with pure, unadulterated disdain. And you are just the shadow. You exist in the background. You are supposed to support her, not drag her down with your petty envy. You should be grateful she even talks to you. A shadow should know its place. I stared at my father, the man who had taken my money, my effort, and my love for decades and thrown it into the void of Bianca's vanity. He had finally said it out loud. To him, I was not a person. I was just the darkness that made his favorite child shine brighter. I slowly picked up my linen napkin and dabbed the corners of my mouth. I placed it gently on the table, smoothing out the creases. The face of the family, I repeated, my voice dangerously calm. And I am the shadow. You are right, Dad. I have been in the shadows for a very long time. I have built entire worlds in the dark while you were blinded by Bianca's glitter. I leaned forward across the table, lowering my voice to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. But there is one thing you forgot about shadows, Dad. When the sun sets, the shadow grows. It keeps growing until it swallows everything whole. And looking at the time, I would say your sun is just about to go down. The dinner finally came to an end, and the table was a graveyard of excess. Empty crystal glasses stained with the remnants of $5,000 wine sat next to plates smeared with the remains of dishes they barely touched. My family had ordered with reckless abandon, consuming the most expensive items on the menu simply because they could. Or at least because they thought they could. Julian leaned back in his chair, unbuttoning his suit jacket to accommodate his fullness. His earlier humiliation at the hands of the chef apparently forgotten. He picked his teeth with a silver toothpick, looking like a king surveying his conquered kingdom. That was a decent meal, Julian announced loudly, signaling for the check with a snap of his fingers. Not the best I have had, obviously, but it will do. The service leaves much to be desired, but the company is what matters, right, Desmond? My father nodded eagerly, wiping crumbs from his chin. Absolutely, Julian. You really know how to treat us. It is such a relief to have a man of means in the family who can handle these things without flinching. The waiter arrived carrying the bill inside a black leather folder, embossed with the restaurant's gold logo. He placed it gently on the table between Julian and my father. Before my father could even feign a polite reach for it, Julian snatched it up. He did not even open it to check the total. To him, looking at the price was something poor people did. It was something I would do. He wanted to show everyone that the number inside was irrelevant to a man of his stature. I knew exactly what was inside that folder. Between the vintage wine, the chef's tasting menu, the extra appetizers Bianca insisted on ordering for photos, and the sparkling water imported from Italy, the total was $15,340. It was more money than my father made in 3 months. Julian reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a card that landed on the table with a heavy metallic thud. It was a black metal card, the kind that screams exclusivity. He slid it across the tablecloth toward the waiter without making eye contact. Put 20% on top for yourself, Julian said with a dismissive wave of his hand. I am feeling generous tonight despite the earlier incompetence. Just bring me the receipt and do not take all night. We have places to be. The waiter bowed, stoically picked up the heavy card and the folder, and walked toward the point-of-sale terminal near the bar. Julian turned back to my father, beaming. You see, Desmond, this is the power of the merger. When you operate at my level, you do not worry about bills. You worry about assets. You worry about legacy. Nia probably worries about coupons. Bianca giggled, sipping the last of her espresso. Oh, stop it, Julian. She is going to cry again. I said nothing. I just watched the waiter. I saw him swipe the card. I saw him pause. I saw him frown and swipe it again. Then I saw him pick up the phone next to the register, speak briefly, and hang up. He typed something into the machine and shook his head. He looked over at our table, his expression unreadable, and began walking back. This walk felt different. It was not the walk of a server bringing back a signed receipt. It was the walk of a bearer of bad news. The waiter stopped at our table. He did not hand the folder back to Julian. He held it close to his chest and leaned down, whispering discreetly, so as not to embarrass the guest. "I apologize, sir," the waiter said softly. But the card was declined. Julian froze. His smile did not disappear instantly. It just froze in place, looking unnatural and grotesque. He blinked once, then twice. He let out a short, incredulous laugh. "What did you say?" Julian asked, his voice rising. "The card, sir. The issuer has declined the transaction. It might be a security hold. Do you have another form of payment?" Julian snatched the card from the waiter's hand, his face turning a deep crimson. "That is impossible. That is a black card. It has no limit. Your machine is broken, or your internet connection is garbage. Run it again." "We ran it 3 times, sir," the waiter replied, his voice remaining polite but firm. "The code is not a security hold. It is a hard decline. Do not honor is the specific message from the bank." "Do not honor," Julian repeated the words, tasting like ash in his mouth. He looked around the restaurant, paranoid that someone was watching. The couple at the next table was definitely listening now. My father looked nervous, shifting in his seat. "Here," Julian hissed, opening his wallet and pulling out a platinum card. "Try this one. It is my corporate expense card. And make sure your machine is actually plugged in this time." The waiter took the second card and walked away. The silence at the table was suffocating. Julian tapped his fingers on the tablecloth, a frantic rhythm that betrayed his panic. "It is just a glitch," Julian muttered to my father, who looked pale. "Banks get skittish with large purchases sometimes. It happens to wealthy people all the time, Desmond. You would not understand." 2 minutes later, the waiter returned. He did not have a receipt. He held the platinum card between 2 fingers, like it was contaminated. "I am sorry, sir," the waiter said, his voice dropping even lower. "This card was also declined. The system says the account has been frozen." "Frozen?" Julian stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "That is ridiculous. I am the vice president of the fund. My accounts cannot be frozen. Who is doing this?" He began frantically pulling cards out of his wallet. A gold card, a rewards card, even a debit card. He threw them onto the table one by one, a desperate spread of plastic. "Try them all," he shouted, losing all semblance of composure. "One of them has to work. I have hundreds of thousands of dollars in these accounts. Do not come back here until one of them works." The waiter looked at the pile of cards, then at Julian's sweating face. He gathered them up with a sigh. "I will try, sir. But if these do not go through, we will need to discuss alternative arrangements. The bill is over $15,000. As the waiter walked away for the 3rd time, the atmosphere at the table shifted from arrogance to pure, unadulterated fear. My father looked at Julian, then at the bill, then at me. Bianca stopped checking her phone, her eyes wide with panic. Julian remained standing, gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles white, his breathing shallow. He looked like a man who was watching his life disintegrate in real time, but he still could not understand why. I sat there calmly, taking a sip of my water. I knew exactly why. I knew that when a company is acquired pending a federal audit, all executive accounts are temporarily frozen to prevent embezzlement. It was a standard clause in the contract I had signed that morning. A contract Julian had bragged about, but clearly never read. The waiter was coming back. He was walking faster this time, and he was not alone. 2 security guards were walking a few steps behind him. Julian saw them, and I watched the color drain completely from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in a stained Italian suit. The 2 security guards stopped a few feet from our table, crossing their arms over their chests. They were large men, wearing dark suits that strained against their muscles, and their presence shifted the atmosphere in the dining room from awkward to dangerous. The whispers from the surrounding tables stopped completely. Everyone was watching, waiting to see the wealthy family in the corner get dragged out for dining and dashing. Julian looked at the guards and then at the pile of rejected credit cards scattered across the white tablecloth like a losing hand of poker. The vein in his forehead was throbbing so hard I thought it might burst. He could not accept that he was broke. He could not accept that his power had been stripped away. In his mind there had to be a villain, and it certainly was not him. He slammed his fist onto the table, causing the silverware to jump and clatter. He pointed a shaking finger at the waiter. "Your machine is broken!" Julian shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "This is a scam! You are rigging the terminals to reject my cards, so you can embarrass me. Do you know who I am? I am a vice president of finance. My credit is impeccable." The waiter remained calm, but his eyes were hard. "Sir, we have tried 4 different cards on 2 different terminals. The result is the same. The banks have frozen your assets. You need to provide a valid form of payment immediately, or we will be forced to escort you to the manager office to wait for the authorities." Authorities. Julian laughed, a high-pitched manic sound. "You are threatening me. You should be looking at her." He spun around in his chair and pointed his finger directly at my face. His eyes were wild, filled with a paranoid delusion that made no sense but felt real to him in that moment. "She did this," Julian hissed, spittle flying from his mouth. "Nia did this. She is jealous of my success. She has been on her phone all night. She must have hacked my accounts. She has friends in low places, probably some criminal underground hackers she met while digging in the dirt. She froze my cards to humiliate me." I looked at him calmly. "Julian, 5 minutes ago you said I was too stupid to read a menu in French. Now you think I am a master cybercriminal capable of freezing a hedge fund account from a dinner table. Which is it? Am I an idiot or a genius? You cannot have it both ways." My father Desmond did not care about logic. He only cared that people were staring and that he was trapped in a situation he could not pay his way out of. He turned to me, his face pale and sweaty. "Nia, fix this," my father demanded, his voice trembling. "You seem to know the manager. That old man bowed to you earlier. Clearly you have some kind of arrangement with him." "What are you saying, Dad?" I asked, my voice cold. "I am saying use your influence," my father snapped. "Tell them to put it on your tab. Tell them to waive the bill. Or better yet, since you are so friendly with the staff, tell them you will work it off. You are used to manual labor. You can stay behind and wash dishes or scrub floors. It is what you are good at. Just get us out of here so Julian can sort out this banking error." Bianca nodded eagerly, clutching her purse tight. "Yes, Nia, do something useful for once. You humiliated Julian earlier with that wine stunt. This is your fault. You owe us. Just go back into the kitchen and tell them you will clean up. I am sure they need help. You look like you belong in a kitchen anyway." I looked at my family. They had just eaten a $15,000 meal. They had insulted me, mocked my career, and treated me like a servant. And now, when the bill came due, they literally wanted me to become a servant to save them. I picked up my glass of water and took a slow, deliberate sip. I set it down gently. "No," I said. My father's jaw dropped. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no," I repeated. "I did not order the $5,000 wine. I did not order the extra appetizers. And I certainly did not insult the staff. This is Julian's celebration. It is Julian's bill. And if Julian cannot pay, then Julian should be the one washing dishes. I hear the grease trap needs cleaning." "You selfish, ungrateful brat," my father hissed. Julian had heard enough. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He dialed 3 numbers and held the phone to his ear, staring at the waiter with pure hatred. "I am not washing dishes," he announced loudly, "and I am not paying for a meal that was clearly sabotaged." He waited for the line to connect. "Yes. Hello, is this the police? I need to report a grand larceny in progress. I am being held hostage at El Obsidian restaurant. The staff is running a credit card skimming operation and they are refusing to let me leave, and I want to report an accomplice. Her name is Nia Green. She is sitting right in front of me. Send a squad car immediately. I want them all arrested. He hung up the phone and crossed his arms, looking at me with a triumphant smirk. You wanted to play games, Nia. Now we will see who laughs when you are in handcuffs. The police are coming, and they will believe the man in the $3,000 suit, not the woman in the muddy boots. I looked at the waiter, I looked at the security guards, and then I looked at Julian. He had just called the police to my restaurant. He had just accused me of stealing from my own business. He had just hammered the final nail into his own coffin, and he did not even know it. The waiter leaned down to me and whispered so only I could hear. Madame, shall we lock the front doors to ensure privacy when the officers arrive? I nodded slightly. Yes, let them come. I want witnesses for what happens next. The two uniformed officers walked through the front doors of El Obsidian, their hands resting near their belts, and the restaurant fell into a hush again. Julian practically leaped from his chair, his face transforming instantly from panicked debtor to righteous victim. He adjusted his tie and strode toward them like he was greeting business partners at a networking event. He pointed a shaking finger at the waiter and then swung it wildly to point at me. Officers! Thank God you are here! Julian exclaimed, his voice booming with false authority. I am Julian Vance, Vice President of Mergers and Acquisitions at Sterling Capital. I need to report a massive financial crime happening right now. This establishment is running a credit card skimming operation. They have locked my corporate accounts and are refusing to let me leave. And that woman sitting there, Nia Green, is their accomplice. She is a known cybercriminal who has hacked my personal banking information. I want them all arrested immediately. Father Desmond stood up, nodding vigorously behind Julian like a bobblehead. Yes, officers, it is true. My son-in-law is a very important man. He would never have a declined card. This is clearly a setup. My daughter has always been jealous of his success. Please take her away before she does more damage to our reputation. The lead officer, a sergeant with a thick gray mustache and tired eyes, did not look impressed by Julian's title or my father's pleading. He looked around the room, noting the spilled wine on Julian's shirt, the pile of rejected credit cards on the table, and the security guard standing stoically by the kitchen. He held up a hand, silencing Julian mid-sentence. Sir, I need you to lower your voice, the sergeant said calmly but firmly. This is a private business, not a trading floor. If there is a dispute about a bill, we will sort it out. But first I need to see identification from everyone involved. Julian scoffed, pulling his driver's license from his wallet with a flourish. This is ridiculous. I am the victim here, but fine, here is my ID. You can run it. You will see, I have a clean record and a credit score of 800, unlike her. He gestured at me with disgust. I remained seated and slowly reached into my back pocket. I pulled out my simple state ID and placed it on the table. Bianca rolled her eyes, muttering about how I probably had a fake ID to hide my criminal past. The sergeant collected the cards. He looked at Julian's license, then at Julian, then he picked up mine. He looked at the photo, then he looked at me. He paused. His eyebrows knit together slightly. He looked over my shoulder at Monsieur Laurent, who was standing quietly in the shadows. Laurent gave a nearly imperceptible nod. The sergeant looked back at the ID card in his hand. He pulled a small radio from his shoulder and murmured something into it. A moment later, the radio crackled back with a response that I could not hear, but Julian strained to listen, hoping it was the confirmation of my arrest warrant. Instead, the sergeant's demeanor changed completely. The stiffness left his shoulders. He lowered the ID cards, but he did not hand them back. He took a step toward the table, stepping right past Julian as if he were a ghost. He stopped directly in front of me. My father looked expectant, waiting for the handcuffs to come out. Julian smirked. crossing his arms, ready to watch me get dragged away, but the sergeant removed his hat. He held it against his chest, in a gesture of old-school respect. "I apologize for the disturbance. Ms. Green," the sergeant said, his voice clear and respectful. "We did not realize this was your establishment. Dispatch, just confirm the ownership records. If these people are trespassing or harassing you, we can remove them from the premises immediately. Just give the word." Madame Julien's smirk vanished. It did not fade slowly. It was wiped off his face as if by a physical blow. He staggered back a step, bumping into the dessert cart. My father's mouth opened and closed like a goldfish. Bianca dropped her phone onto her plate with a loud clatter. "What did you say?" Julien whispered, his voice trembling. "What did you call her? Ownership records? That is a mistake. She is a farmer. She grows mushrooms." The sergeant turned to look at Julien, his eyes now cold and hard. "Sir, I suggest you step back. You are harassing the owner of this property, and given that you have called in a false police report and failed to pay a $15,000 bill, I would be very careful about your next words. Ms. Green, do you want to press charges against this man?" I looked at Julien. I looked at the fear in his eyes, the realization that the ground beneath his feet had just dissolved. The cliffhanger was over, the fall had begun. I stood up slowly, smoothing out my jeans. "No, officer," I said, my voice calm. "Not yet. I think we need to have a little family meeting first, but please keep the handcuffs ready. I have a feeling you are going to need them very soon." The sergeant turned his radio down and looked at Julien with an expression that sat somewhere between pity and annoyance. He held my identification card up next to the digital display on his handheld device and nodded once, confirming the match. "This is not a mistake, sir," the sergeant said, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "The records are quite clear. Ms. Naya Green is the sole proprietor of Vanguard Hospitality Group, which holds the deed to this building and the operating license for El Obsidienne. You are currently standing in her restaurant, eating her food and drinking her wine, and based on your earlier statement, you are refusing to pay her for it." The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. My father, Desmond, slumped back into his chair, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly as he looked from the police officer to me. He had spent the last decade telling anyone who would listen that I was a failure, a stain on the family legacy. Now he was sitting in an establishment worth millions, realizing that the failure was actually his own judgment. Bianca stopped recording on her phone, realizing that the video she was capturing was not going to make me look bad, it was going to destroy her husband. But Julien could not process it. His narcissism was a fortress that reality could not easily breach. He shook his head violently, stepping forward until he was almost chest to chest with the police officer. "You are lying!" Julien shouted, his face twisting into an ugly sneer. "This is a trick. Look at her. Just look at her. She is wearing work boots. She has dirt under her fingernails. She smells like fertilizer. Does that look like a restaurant owner to you? She is a farmer. She grows mushrooms and potatoes. That is all she does. She digs in the dirt while I manage millions." He turned to point a trembling finger at me. "Tell them, Nia. Tell them you are just a lowly supplier. Tell them this is some kind of sick joke." I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back. It scraped against the floor, the only sound in the room besides Julien's heavy breathing. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. "You are right, Julien," I said calmly, walking around the table until I stood directly in front of him. "I am a farmer. I spend my mornings in the fields checking soil pH and managing irrigation. I grow the truffles you ate tonight. I grow the grapes for the wine you spilled. I am a farmer, and I am proud of it." I took a step closer, forcing him to look me in the eye. "But 5 years ago I got tired of middlemen like you trying to squeeze my margins. I got tired of restaurants disrespecting the produce I worked so hard to grow. So I decided to cut out the middleman. I bought the supply chain. I bought the distribution network. And then I bought the restaurants. I grow the vegetables. Julien and I also own the tables they are served on. It is called vertical integration. I would think a vice president of mergers and acquisitions would understand that concept. Julian staggered back as if I had physically struck him. The logic was undeniable, but his ego refused to accept it. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "No. You are lying. You are poor. Dad said you were poor." The sergeant had heard enough. He stepped forward, his hand moving to the handcuffs on his belt. "Sir, you are causing a disturbance, and you have filed a false police report against the business owner," the sergeant said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Furthermore, dispatch has just informed me that the bank has flagged the credit cards you attempted to use. They have been reported as lost or stolen, and there is a hold on them for suspected fraud." "Fraud!" Julian shrieked, his voice cracking. "That is my company card. I am the vice president." "Not anymore, sir," the sergeant said. "If the bank flagged them, it means your authorization has been revoked. You are attempting to use invalid financial instruments to pay for services. That is theft of service and suspected credit card fraud. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Julian's eyes went wide. He looked at my father for help, but Desmond was staring at the tablecloth, wishing he could disappear. He looked at Bianca, but she was already inching away from him, trying to distance herself from the sinking ship. "You cannot arrest me!" Julian screamed, as the sergeant grabbed his wrist and spun him around. "Do you know who I am? I will sue this entire department. I will have your badge." The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was sharp and final. It was the sound of consequences, arriving for a man who thought he was immune to them. "You have the right to remain silent," the sergeant recited, tightening the metal cuffs against Julian's wrists. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Julian struggled uselessly against the restraints, his face pressed against the wall of the restaurant he had tried to dominate just moments ago. He turned his head, looking at me with pure desperation. "Nia, tell them," Julian begged, his arrogance finally breaking. "Tell them this is a misunderstanding. We are family. You cannot let them take me to jail. Think of your sister. Think of your father." I looked at him calmly, my expression unreadable. I looked at the wine stain on his shirt. I looked at the arrogance that was still lurking just beneath his fear. "I am thinking of them, Julian," I said softly. "And I am thinking that for the first time in a long time, justice is actually being served at this table. Officers, please take him out the back. I do not want him upsetting the other guests." The flashing blue lights of the police cruiser illuminated the panic on my father's face, making him look older and smaller than I had ever seen him. Julian was in the back seat, shouting muffled threats through the glass, his face pressed against the window like a trapped animal. Bianca was sobbing, standing on the curb in her expensive heels, clutching her purse as if it contained the last shred of her dignity. The restaurant patrons were watching from the windows, witnessing the complete collapse of the Vance family facade. My father Desmond rushed toward me, grabbing my arm with a grip that was meant to be authoritative, but felt desperate. "Nia, you have to stop this," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "You cannot let them take him. He is family. He is the father of your future nieces and nephews. Tell the officers it was a mistake. Tell them you gave him permission." I pulled my arm away from his grasp, dusting off the sleeve of my jacket where he had touched me. "He is not family, Dad," I said, my voice flat. "He is a thief who tried to have me arrested in my own restaurant. He dug this hole himself." Bianca stumbled over, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "Nia, please," she wailed. "We do not have the money for bail. His accounts are frozen. If he stays in jail tonight, he will miss the merger meeting tomorrow. He will lose everything. You have money, clearly. You own this place. Just pay the bail, please." I looked at them. Two people who had spent my entire life making me feel small. Two people who had laughed when Julian insulted me. Now they were begging for the very resources they had mocked. I signaled to Monsieur Laurent, who was standing by the valet stand holding a set of keys. He walked over briskly, ignoring my father and sister completely. Your car? Madame Laurent said, placing the heavy key fob in my hand. I had it brought around from the private garage. It has been detailed and fueled. Thank you, Laurent, I said, taking the keys. My father stared at the keys in my hand. They were for a Bentley Bentayga. It was a vehicle that cost more than his house. You drive a Bentley, he whispered, his eyes wide with shock. But you arrived in that old truck. I smiled. I drive the truck for work, Dad. I drive the Bentley for life. The truck earns the money. The Bentley enjoys it. You would know the difference if you had ever worked a day in your life, instead of just managing other people's money. I walked toward the sleek black SUV that was idling at the curb. The engine purred with a quiet power that matched my mood. I opened the door and the smell of premium leather filled the air. Nia, wait! Bianca screamed, running toward the car. You cannot leave us here. Our car is impounded because of the unpaid bill. How are we supposed to get home? It is freezing. I paused with one foot inside the vehicle. I looked at the thermometer on the dashboard. It was 32 degrees outside. A cold, biting night. I looked at my sister shivering in her silk dress. Then I looked at my father huddled in his coat. And suddenly I wasn't standing outside a luxury restaurant anymore. I was 25 years old again, standing on the front porch of my childhood home. It was snowing. My bags were on the driveway, dumped there by my father. I could still feel the biting cold wind cutting through my thin jacket. I could still hear his voice booming through the open door. If you want to drop out of law school to play in the dirt, then you can go live in the dirt, he had shouted. Do not come back until you have a real job. You are a disgrace to this family, Nia. I remembered begging him. I remembered telling him I had nowhere to go. I remembered him slamming the door in my face and turning off the porch light, leaving me in the darkness. I had slept in my old sedan that night, shivering until the sun came up, promising myself that I would never be that cold or that helpless again. I blinked, coming back to the present. The memory didn't make me sad anymore. It made me strong. It reminded me that mercy was a luxury they had never afforded me. There is a bus stop 3 blocks down, I told Bianca, pointing down the dark street. The number 12 runs every hour. Make sure you have exact change. I hear they are strict about that. I climbed into the driver's seat and pulled the door shut, blocking out their protests. As I pulled away from the curb, I glanced in the rearview mirror. I saw them standing there, small and defeated, bathed in the red glow of my taillights. I did not feel guilt. I felt a sense of closure so profound, it almost felt like joy. I drove home to my estate located on the hills overlooking the city. I walked into my quiet, expansive house, greeted by my dogs. I poured myself a glass of water and stood on the balcony looking out at the city lights. Somewhere down there, Julian was being processed in a holding cell. Somewhere down there, my father and sister were waiting for a bus. And up here, I was finally free. I slept better that night than I had in 10 years. There were no nightmares about failing my father. There was only the deep, restful sleep of a woman who knows exactly who she is. The next morning, sunlight flooded my bedroom. I woke up naturally without an alarm. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. There was a single text message waiting for me. It was from my executive assistant. It read simply, "Boardroom is prepped. The Sterling Capital Acquisition team is waiting. They are expecting the chairman. Should I send the car?" I smiled. Julian was worried about missing his meeting. I needed to make sure he didn't. After all, it would be rude to start the merger without the groom, even if he was going to be attending in handcuffs. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor was smooth and silent. I checked my reflection in the polished metal doors. The woman staring back at me was not the farmer who had been humiliated at dinner the night before. I was wearing a bespoke white suit tailored to perfection in Milan, and my hair was pulled back in a severe, uncompromising bun. Behind me stood 4 of the most expensive corporate lawyers in the country, carrying briefcases filled with the evidence that would dismantle my brother-in-law's life. We stepped out into the lobby of Sterling Capital. The receptionist looked up, ready to ask for our appointments, but the words died in her throat when she saw the look in my eyes. I walked past her without breaking stride, my heels clicking rhythmically on the marble floor like a ticking clock. I could hear Julian's voice booming from the main conference room down the hall. He was loud, frantic, and desperate. My sources told me Bianca had emptied her emergency savings and pawned her remaining jewelry to bail him out at 4 in the morning. He had barely slept. He had rushed straight here trying to secure his position before the truth could catch up to him. I signaled my team to stop just outside the double-glass doors. I wanted to listen. I wanted to hear exactly how deep of a hole he was digging. Inside the room, about 20 senior executives sat around a long mahogany table. They looked nervous. They were whispering among themselves, glancing at their phones where news of Julian's arrest was likely already trending. But Julian was standing at the head of the table, pacing back and forth like a manic preacher. He looked terrible. His eyes were bloodshot, his skin was pasty, and he was sweating profusely. Behind him, projected on a massive screen, was the logo of my company, NG Holdings. "Listen to me, everyone," Julian shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "The rumors are lies. The incident last night was a misunderstanding. A banking error. I have already spoken to my lawyers and we are suing the police department. It has nothing to do with this company." He pointed at the screen behind him. "This merger is the only thing that matters," he continued, his voice cracking slightly. "NG Holdings chose us because of me. They chose us because of my vision. The owner of NG is a recluse, but he trusts me. He knows that I am the only one capable of leading this transition. Once I sign the papers today, our accounts will be unlocked, and we will be the most powerful firm in the city. Anyone who doubts me can pack their desk right now." A brave young analyst raised her hand. "But sir," she asked timidly, "if the accounts are frozen, how can we process the payroll today? The staff is worried." Julian's face turned a dangerous shade of purple. "Payroll is not your concern," he screamed. "I am the vice president. I control the money. And once I meet with the NG representative this afternoon, we will be swimming in cash. I am the savior of this company. I am the only reason you people have jobs." I nodded to the security guard standing by the door. It was time. The guard pushed the heavy doors open, and I stepped into the room. The air conditioning was cold, but my presence dropped the temperature in the room by another 10 degrees. Every head turned. The executives looked at me with confusion. They saw a woman radiating power and wealth flanked by a legal army. They did not know who I was, but they knew I was important. Julian stopped mid-sentence. He froze. He blinked rapidly, trying to process what he was seeing. He looked at my suit. He looked at my shoes. He looked at the lawyers. For a second I saw a flash of pure terror in his eyes. He knew deep down that his reckoning had arrived. But then his ego took over. His brain simply refused to accept reality. He could not reconcile the powerful woman standing in his boardroom with the sister-in-law he despised. He reverted to his default setting, which was to belittle me. He let out a short, incredulous laugh and stepped away from the podium, walking toward me with a sneer that looked out of place on his tired face. "What are you doing here?" Nia Julian asked, his voice dripping with mock confusion. "Security! How did she get in here? This is a closed meeting for executives." He stopped a few feet away from me, looking around at his staff and rolling his eyes, trying to make them share in his joke. "Did you come to beg for bail money for your dad?" he asked loudly. "Or did you finally get a real job? Is that it? Did the catering company hire you? Are you here to deliver the lunch vegetables, Nia? The service entrance is in the alley with the trash. That is where you belong." I walked past him, ignoring his insult about the trash alley and the vegetables. I did not stop walking until I reached the head of the vast mahogany table where the empty chairman's seat waited. The leather was worn and expensive, the kind of chair designed for men who thought they ruled the world. I placed my hand on the back of it, and the room went deadly silent. The 20 executives sitting around the table stopped breathing. They looked from me to Julian and back again, sensing a shift in the tectonic plates of their company, but unable to predict the earthquake that was coming. Julian turned around, his face twisted in a mix of confusion and rage. He took a step toward me, his hands balled into fists. "Get away from there, Naya," he snapped. "That is the seat for the NG representative. You are going to get us all fired. Security, remove this woman immediately." The security guard by the door did not move. He crossed his arms and looked at the floor. I turned to face the room, my voice calm and projecting to the furthest corner without shouting. "You asked me last night if I knew what NG stood for, Julian. You laughed and said it was probably New Generation or Next Global. You said the owner was a silent old man, living on a yacht in the Mediterranean. You were wrong on all counts." I signaled to my lead attorney, who stepped forward and placed a heavy stack of notarized documents in the center of the table. The sound of the paper hitting the wood echoed like a gavel strike. "NG does not stand for New Generation," Y said, looking Julian dead in the eye. "It stands for Naya Green." A collective gasp went through the room. One of the senior partners dropped his pen. Julian's mouth fell open, but no sound came out. He looked like a man trying to comprehend a new color he had never seen before. I continued, my voice hardening into steel. "I am the sole proprietor of NG Holdings. And as of 9 o'clock this morning, my company has finalized the acquisition of 51% of Sterling Capital's outstanding shares. I am not here to deliver vegetables, Julian. I am here because I own this building, I own this table, and most importantly, I own the job you are so desperate to keep." I unbuttoned my white blazer and sat down in the chairman's chair. I leaned back, resting my elbows on the armrests, claiming the space with an ease that terrified him. "Welcome to your performance review, Julian," I said. For a moment, Julian just stood there, swaying slightly, as if the floor had turned into liquid. His entire identity was built on the lie that he was better than me. He needed me to be the failure so he could be the success. If I was the billionaire owner of the company acquiring him, then his entire life was a lie. His brain snapped. The narcissism that had protected him for years shattered, leaving only raw, violent rage. "You are lying," he screamed, his voice shredding the professional atmosphere of the boardroom. "You are a witch! You stole this! This is a trick! You are a dirt farmer! You cannot be the chairman! Get out of my chair!" He lunged at me. He scrambled over this corner of the table, his eyes wide and wild, his hands reaching for my throat. The executive screamed and scrambled back from the table chairs, toppling over in the chaos. I did not flinch. I did not move. I watched him come toward me with the detached curiosity of a scientist watching a specimen self-destruct. Before he could get within 3 feet of me, 2 large security guards who had been waiting in the hall burst into the room. They intercepted him mid-air, tackling him to the expensive carpet with a heavy thud. Julian thrashed and kicked, screaming profanities that would make a sailor blush. They pinned his arms behind his back, forcing his face into the floor, the same floor he had told me I was destined to scrub. "Get off me!" he shrieked, spitting onto the carpet. "I am the vice president. She is a fraud. Arrest her!" I waited for the guards to secure him completely. Then I picked up a second folder, a thick black binder that my forensic accountant had prepared overnight. I opened it slowly, the sound of the stiff cover creaking in the silence. "Lift him up," I commanded. The guards hauled Julian to his knees. His suit was rumpled, his hair was a mess, and his tie was crooked. He looked up at me, panting heavily, hate radiating from his eyes. "You are fired, Julian," I said simply. "But losing your job is the least of your problems." I tossed the black binder onto the floor directly in front of his knees. It slid across the carpet and stopped inches from his face. "You wanted to talk about finances, Julian, so let us talk. That binder contains 3 years of credit card statements and wire transfers. It details exactly how you have been siphoning money from the company expense accounts to fund your lifestyle." I leaned forward in the chair, looking down at him. "You bought a Porsche with the marketing budget. You paid for your honeymoon with the client retention fund. And that diamond ring you bought for my sister Bianca, the one she was waving in my face last night. You paid for that with the employee pension fund. That is federal embezzlement, Julian. And I have already sent digital copies to the FBI. Julian stared at the black binder lying on the carpet inches from his knees, as if it were a venomous snake coiling to strike. The room was so silent that the hum of the projector fan sounded like a jet engine. The 20 executives around the table were leaning forward, their eyes wide with a mixture of horror and fascination, waiting to see the contents of the dossier that had brought their arrogant vice president to his knees. Julian's hands shook as he reached out and flipped the cover open. His eyes scanned the first page, and the little color remaining in his face drained away, leaving him looking like a wax figure melting under the heat of his own corruption. "This is illegal," Julian stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "You cannot have these records. These are private banking documents. This is a violation of my privacy. Privacy is a luxury afforded to honest men, Julian." I said, my voice echoing off the glass walls of the boardroom. "When you use corporate funds to finance your personal life, you forfeit your right to privacy. Look at page 14. That is the wire transfer for the down payment on your vacation home in the Hamptons, $300,000 sent to a shell company in your name." I walked slowly around the table, addressing the board members who were listening with rapt attention. He categorized it as a vendor payment for consulting services. I explained, pointing at the screen where my legal team was now projecting the incriminating bank statements. "But the consulting firm does not exist. The address listed is a post office box in Delaware, registered to Julian Vance. He has been stealing from this company for 3 years. He has been stealing from all of you. Every year he told you there was no budget for bonuses, he was wiring that money to himself." A murmur of anger rippled through the room. The executives who had feared Julian just moments ago now looked at him with pure loathing. He had not just hurt the company, he had stolen their livelihoods. Julian looked up at me, sweat dripping from his nose onto the expensive carpet. "It was Bianca," he blurted out, desperation making him turn on his own wife. "She made me do it. She needed the lifestyle. She threatened to leave me if I did not buy her the house and the jewelry. I did it for her, Nia. You know how she is." I looked at him with disgust. A true leader takes responsibility. A coward blames his wife. I signaled to the head of HR, who was standing by the door holding a tablet. "Julian Vance." I said, my voice cold and official, as the majority shareholder and new chairman of the board. "I am terminating your employment immediately for cause. This means no severance package, no golden parachute, no health insurance. And effective this second, we are clawing back all of your unvested stock options to cover a fraction of what you stole." "You cannot do that," Julian screamed, trying to stand up, but the guards pushed him back down. "I own 10% of this company. I have rights. You have nothing." I corrected him. "We filed a civil forfeiture order this morning. Your stocks, your accounts, and your assets have been seized to pay back the $4 million you embezzled. You are leaving this building with less than you had when you walked in. You are bankrupt, Julian." I leaned down until my face was inches from his. I wanted him to see the eyes of the woman he had tormented for years. I wanted him to see that the person ending him was not a stranger, but the sister-in-law he had underestimated. "Do you remember what you told me at dinner last night?" I asked softly. "You told me I smelled like fertilizer. You told me I smelled like pig manure because I work with the earth." I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of his fear and his expensive cologne, which could not mask the stench of his failure. "Well, Julian." "Take a deep breath," I whispered. "Because where you are going, they do not have French cologne. You once turned your nose up at the smell of honest work. Now you are about to get very familiar with the smell of a federal prison cell." I stood up and nodded to the door. "Send them in." The double doors swung open, and 4 agents wearing navy blue windbreakers with yellow letters on the back marched in. FBI Economic Crimes Division. They did not look like the local police sergeant. They moved with a terrifying efficiency. They hauled Julian to his feet and replaced the plastic zip ties with heavy steel handcuffs. Julian began to sob. It was an ugly sound, a high-pitched wailing that embarrassed everyone in the room. "Nia, please," he cried as they dragged him toward the door. "Call Dad. Tell him to help me. I cannot go to prison. I am not built for prison." I watched him go, my expression unmoving. "I will tell Dad," I said. "I will tell him exactly who you really are." As the agents dragged him out into the hallway, his expensive Italian shoes dragging uselessly across the floor, I turned back to the room. The executives were staring at me, waiting to see if they were next. I walked back to the head of the table and sat down. I smoothed out the lapel of my white suit. "Now that we have taken out the trash," I said, picking up the meeting agenda, "let us discuss the future of this company. And let us be clear about one thing. In my company, honesty is the only currency that matters. Who would like to begin the financial report?" The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, breaking the stunned silence of the boardroom, where the executives were still processing the arrest of their vice president. I did not even have time to close the black binder before the sound of angry heels clicking against the marble floor echoed down the hallway. It was a sound I knew well. It was the rhythm of entitlement. It was my sister Bianca. She burst through the double doors breathless and flushed her eyes, darting around the room, looking for the husband who had promised to save her financial future. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere coat and carrying a limited edition handbag that I knew cost more than the down payment on my first house. When her eyes landed on the empty chair at the end of the table, she looked confused. But when they shifted to the head of the table and saw me sitting in the chairman's seat, her confusion turned into hysterical rage. "Where is Julian?" she screamed, storming past the security guard who made no move to stop her. "Get out of his chair, Naya. Have you lost your mind? You cannot just walk in here and play pretend. This is a place of business, not a sandbox for your delusions. Where is my husband?" I remained seated, my hands folded calmly on top of the black binder. I looked at her with a mixture of pity and resolve. She really had no idea. She was still living in the fantasy world where she was the princess and I was the peasant. "Your husband has left the building, Bianca," I said, my voice steady and cool. "If you hurry, you might be able to see him from the window. He is in the back of the second unmarked sedan down there, the one with the flashing lights." Bianca froze halfway to the table. She blinked rapidly, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why is he in a police car? What did you do to him? You told the police lies, didn't you? You made up some story to get revenge because he humiliated you at dinner." I opened the binder again and pulled out a stack of credit card statements stapled together with a thick red tag marked Evidence. I slid them across the polished mahogany table until they stopped right in front of her perfectly manicured hands. "I did not have to tell them anything, Bianca," I said. "The numbers told the story for me. Julian did not just humiliate me at dinner, he humiliated this entire company. He has been stealing corporate funds for 3 years to pay for your lifestyle." Bianca scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "That is ridiculous. Julian makes plenty of money. We are wealthy, Nia. You are just jealous because you are broke." I stood up then slowly and walked around the table until I was standing right in front of her. I reached out and pointed a finger at the handbag she was clutching so tightly against her chest. It was a Birkin bag made of ostrich leather. "That bag cost $40,000, I said. Bianca hugged it tighter. "So what? Julian bought it for my birthday." "No, he didn't," I corrected her. "The employee pension fund bought it for your birthday. And those Louboutin heels you are wearing, the marketing budget bought those. And the diamond earrings sparkling in your ears, that was money meant for client retention." I watched the color drain from her face as the reality of my words began to sink in. She looked down at her clothes, then back at me, her eyes wide with fear. "You are lying," she stammered, backing away from me. "He would not do that. He is a finance genius. He is a thief, Bianca. I said, stepping closer. And do you know what that makes you? You are the beneficiary of stolen property. In the eyes of the law, that makes you an accessory to embezzlement. Bianca shook her head, tears beginning to well up in her eyes. I didn't know, she sobbed. I swear I didn't know. I just thought he was successful. You cannot blame me for his mistakes. Ignorance is not a defense when you are spending $50,000 a month on a salary of $10,000, I said coldly. And here is the part that is going to hurt the most. I pointed to the door where 2 FBI agents had just reappeared looking for any additional evidence. Everything you are wearing, Bianca. The bag, the coat, the shoes, the jewelry. It was all purchased with stolen money. That means it is not yours. It belongs to the company. And now it belongs to the federal government as evidence. Bianca looked down at her precious handbag, the symbol of her status, the shield she used to protect herself from feeling inferior. She looked at the agents who were walking toward her with grim expressions. You have to be kidding, she whispered, clutching the bag until her knuckles turned white. They cannot take my things. These are my things. They are proceeds of a crime, I said, my voice final and absolute. Hand them over, Bianca, or they will arrest you for obstruction of justice and put you in the cell right next to Julian. Bianca looked at me pleadingly, searching for the sister she had bullied for decades, hoping I would save her one last time, hoping I would sell another necklace to bail her out. But all she found in my eyes was a mirror reflecting her own emptiness. She realized in that terrifying moment that she was not the golden child anymore. She was just a woman standing in a borrowed coat, about to lose the only thing she ever truly loved, her status. The sun was setting over the city skyline, casting long shadows across the leather interior of my car, when my phone began to buzz against the center console. I did not need to look at the screen to know who it was. My father, Desmond, had been calling non-stop for the last hour, leaving voicemails that ranged from sobbing pleas to screaming threats. I finally answered the call, connecting it to the car's Bluetooth system. Come home now. My father's voice boomed through the speakers, his words slurred slightly by what I assumed was a significant amount of scotch. You get your ungrateful self over here right now, Nia. You have a lot of explaining to do. I did not argue. I did not make excuses. I simply said I will be there in 20 minutes and hung up. I was not going back to apologize. I was going back to finish what they had started. I pulled the Bentley into the driveway of the house I grew up in. It was a large 2-story colonial that my father took immense pride in. The lawn was perfectly manicured, and the paint was fresh, but inside the walls held decades of silence and neglect. I walked up the front steps, the sound of my heels echoing in the quiet suburban evening. I did not knock. I used my key, the one I had kept on my keychain for 10 years, as a reminder of where I came from. The moment I stepped into the foyer, the smell hit me. It was the smell of old wood polish and stale air. My father was waiting for me in the living room, standing by the fireplace under a large portrait of Bianca. There were no pictures of me in this room. There never had been. Desmond turned around when he heard me enter. His face was flushed red and his eyes were wild. He looked at my expensive suit and my calm demeanor, and it seemed to fuel his rage. He marched across the room, closing the distance between us with aggressive strides. You monster, he shouted, spitting the words at me. You cold-hearted monster. I just got off the phone with Bianca. She is hysterical. She said the FBI took everything. Her bag, her shoes, even her engagement ring. And Julian. My God, Nia, they have him in a federal holding cell. They are talking about 20 years in prison. He stopped directly in front of me, his chest heaving. How could you do this to your own family, he screamed. How could you be so cruel? Julian made a mistake, a financial error. You could have fixed it. You have the money now, apparently. You could have written a check and made it go away. But instead you destroyed them. You destroyed us. He did not make a mistake, Dad, I said, my voice steady. He stole $4 million, and I did not destroy them. I just turned on the lights. They destroyed themselves. Don't you dare lecture me, my father roared. He raised his hand. It was a reflex born of years of unchecked authority. He swung his arm, aiming a slap directly at my face, just like he used to do when I was a teenager, and spoke out of turn. But I was not a teenager anymore. I caught his wrist in midair. My grip was iron strong, honed by years of lifting crates and working the land. I held his hand, inches from my face, staring into his shocked eyes. "Do not ever touch me again," I said quietly, releasing his wrist with a shove that sent him stumbling back a few steps. My father looked at his own hand, then at me as if seeing a stranger. "You have changed, Nia," he whispered. "You have become hard, you are vicious. You are... I do not even recognize you. You are not my daughter. My daughter would protect her family." I laughed a dry, humorless sound. Protect her family? Is that what you think you were doing all these years, Dad? Protecting me? When you kicked me out in the snow, when you let Bianca bully me, when you sat there last night and watched Julian humiliate me. You never protected me. You never even liked me. I took a step toward him, driving him back toward the fireplace. You never considered me family. I continued, letting the anger I had suppressed for decades finally rise to the surface. To you, I was just the spare, the backup plan. And once you thought I was poor, I became a nuisance. But the moment you realized I had money, you wanted me to pay the bill. You only see me as a resource, Dad. I was just a backup ATM waiting for your precious golden child and her thief of a husband to fail. My father's lip curled. You are ungrateful. I put a roof over your head. I gave you this house. View this. He waved his arms around the room, gesturing to the walls and the furniture. This is my house, he shouted, trying to regain his dominance. I am the patriarch of this family, and as long as you are under my roof, you will show me respect. If you are going to destroy your sister and ruin our name, then you can get out. Get out of my house, Nia. I never want to see you again. I stood there amidst the furniture that cost more than my first car, looking at the man who claimed to own it all. He looked so small, standing there, clinging to his title and his property like a drowning man clinging to a rock. I looked him in the eye and tilted my head slightly. Your roof? I asked. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folded document. It was a deed of trust transfer dated 6 months ago. You really think this house is still yours, don't you, Dad? My father snatched the document from my hand, his eyes scanning the legal jargon with frantic desperation. The paper shook violently in his grip as he read the title of the deed and the transfer of ownership history. He stopped at a specific paragraph near the bottom, and his face went from red to a ghostly pale gray. He looked up at me, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. This is impossible, he whispered, his voice trembling. This house is paid off. I paid the final mortgage payment in 1998. I have the letter from the bank framed in my study. This says there is a lien against the property. A massive lien. There was a lien. I corrected him, my voice echoing in the silent hallway, past tense. There was a second mortgage taken out 3 years ago. Then a third mortgage. Then a home equity line of credit that tapped into every single cent of value this property had. My father shook his head violently, denying the reality staring him in the face. I never signed for any of this. I would never mortgage this house. This is my legacy. You did not sign it, I said, stepping closer to him. But you gave power of attorney to Julian because you thought he was a financial wizard. You trusted him more than you trusted yourself. And do you know what your precious son-in-law did with that power? He did not invest in blue-chip stocks. He did not diversify your portfolio. I paused, letting the weight of the betrayal sink in. He leveraged this house to the hilt to fund his cryptocurrency addiction. He bet the roof over your head on speculative digital coins that crashed to zero last winter. He lost it all, Dad. Every single dollar of equity you spent 40 years building. He gambled it away on an app while sitting on your couch drinking your scotch. My father leaned against the wall for support, clutching his chest. He lost the house, he wheezed. He did, I confirmed. 6 months ago the bank initiated foreclosure proceedings. You did not know because Julian intercepted the mail. He hid the notices. He was going to let the sheriff come here and throw you out on the street while he and Bianca moved into a penthouse. The bank had already scheduled the auction. This house was listed as a toxic asset. I walked over to the window looking out at the lawn my father loved so much. When I saw the listing on the foreclosure market, I recognized the address immediately. I called the bank. I bought the debt, Dad. I paid off the arrears. I paid the penalties. I bought the note for cash. My father looked at me with a glimmer of hope in his eyes. A hope that I was the savior he could manipulate once again. You bought it, he said, letting out a ragged breath. Thank God. You saved the house. You saved us, Nia. I knew you would step up. We can work this out. I will speak to Julian. Obviously he made a mistake, but now that it is in the family, we can just transfer it back to me, and I will pay you back slowly. I turned around slowly and looked at him. The delusion was breathtaking. Even after everything, he still thought he was entitled to my labor and my money. Transfer it back, I repeated, my voice dropping an octave. You think I bought this house to give it back to you? My father's smile faltered. Well, yes. You are my daughter. It is my house. It was your house, I said, cutting him off. It was your house when you told me I wasn't good enough to live in it. It was your house when you let Bianca mock me in the kitchen. But for the last 6 months it has been my house. I walked back to him, taking the deed from his limp hand. I let you stay here. I paid the property taxes. I paid the insurance. I covered the utilities when Julian stopped paying the bills. I did all of that without saying a word because I wanted to see one thing. I wanted to see if you would treat me with basic human decency without knowing I held the power. I wanted to see if you could love me just because I was your daughter, not because I was your landlord. And you failed, I said, my voice breaking slightly before hardening again. You failed every single day. You treated me like a servant in a house I owned. You called me poor while eating food paid for by my equity. You are not a father to me, Desmond. You are just a bad tenant, and I have a strict policy regarding bad tenants. My father looked terrified now, realizing that the dynamic had shifted permanently. He was not speaking to his child anymore. He was speaking to NG Holdings. Nia, please, he begged, tears streaming down his face. You cannot do this. I am an old man. This is the only home I have ever known. Where will I go? Bianca has nothing. Julian is going to prison. If you take the house, we will be on the street. That is not my problem, I said coldly. You have a pension. It is small, but it is enough for a studio apartment on the other side of town. It is certainly more than I had when you threw me out into the snow with $50 in my pocket. I checked my watch. It was a diamond-encrusted timepiece that cost more than the furniture in the room. I am terminating your tenancy effective immediately, I announced. Since there is no lease agreement, you are technically squatters. However, I am feeling generous. I walked to the front door and opened it wide, letting the cold night air rush into the warm foyer. You have 24 hours. Pack what you can carry in your car. Leave the furniture, leave the appliances, and leave the keys on the counter. If you are not gone by sunset tomorrow, I will have the sheriff execute the eviction order that has been sitting on my desk for 6 months. Start packing, Dad. Your lease is up. The 24-hour deadline arrived with the rising sun casting a harsh, revealing light on the chaos unfolding in my driveway. It was not a dignified exit. My father Desmond and my sister Bianca were not packing with the quiet resolve of people starting a new chapter. They were leaving with the noisy, chaotic energy of people who still believed they were the victims of a great injustice. A rusted U-Haul truck sat idling at the curb, leaking oil onto the pavement, a stark contrast to the pristine Bentleys and Mercedes usually parked on this street. Desmond was standing by the open back of the truck, holding a box of his old trophies. He was putting on a performance for Mrs. Gable, the neighborhood gossip, who was watering her petunias with intense curiosity just 10 feet away. I stood on the porch leaning against the railing, drinking a cup of coffee and listening to his lies. "She tricked me." Desmond sobbed loud enough for the entire cul-de-sac to hear. "My own daughter. She used high-priced lawyers to steal the deed out from under me. I am an old man, Mrs. Gable. I have lived here for 40 years. And now she is throwing me out on the street because she is jealous of her sister. It is elder abuse. That is what it is." Mrs. Gable shook her head, clucking her tongue in sympathy, not knowing that Desmond had lost the house gambling on digital coins and that I was the only reason he had not been evicted 6 months ago. I did not correct him. I did not care what the neighbors thought. The truth was in the deed, and the truth was in the bank account. Then the front door banged open behind me. Bianca struggled out, dragging a large plastic storage bin that was taped shut with layers of gray duct tape. She was sweating, her makeup smeared, and she looked frantic. She tried to hurry past me, avoiding eye contact, her knuckles white as she gripped the handles of the heavy bin. I watched her descent down the stairs. Something was wrong. Bianca never lifted anything heavy. If she was carrying a box herself, it meant she did not want anyone else to see what was inside. "Stop," I said, my voice cutting through the morning air like a whip crack. Bianca froze on the bottom step. "I am just moving my winter clothes, Nia," she snapped, not turning around. "Leave me alone. You have taken everything else. Let me at least have my coats. Put the box down, Bianca," I commanded, walking slowly down the steps. She clutched it tighter. "No. It is my personal property. You have no right to search it." I signaled to the sheriff deputy who I had hired to oversee the eviction. He was leaning against his patrol car at the end of the driveway, looking bored, but at my signal he straightened up and placed his hand on his belt. "Open the box, Bianca," I said, standing directly in front of her. "Or I will have the deputy open it for you, and if I find a single item that belongs to the house, I will have you arrested for theft right here in front of Mrs. Gable and the rest of the neighborhood." Bianca's eyes darted around frantically. She looked at the neighbors who had stopped pretending to garden and were now openly staring. She looked at the deputy who was walking toward us. With a scream of frustration, she dropped the box on the pavement. The plastic cracked and the tape split. I reached down and ripped the lid off. Inside, there were no winter coats. Instead, nestled in layers of bubble wrap, was my grandmother's antique silver tea set, the one that had been in the dining room display cabinet for 50 years. Next to it was a collection of crystal stemware that I had purchased for the house last Christmas, and a small, heavy box containing the spare keys to the Bentley. I looked up at her, my expression cold. "You were stealing the silver," I said. "And my car keys." "It is family property," Bianca shrieked, stamping her foot. "Grandma left it to the family. I am family. I deserve it more than you. You will just sell it or let it rot. And I needed the car keys in case of an emergency." "Grandma left it to the owner of the house," I corrected her, picking up the heavy silver teapot. "That is me. And stealing a car key is grand theft auto intent." I pointed to the grass beside the driveway. "Empty your pockets, Bianca. And that purse. Right now." She hesitated, but the deputy took another step forward. Sobbing with humiliation, Bianca dumped her purse onto the lawn. Out fell 3 silver spoons, a diamond-encrusted paperweight from my father's study, and a set of designer coasters. "Pick them up," I told the deputy. "Log them as return property." Bianca ran to the truck, wailing, throwing herself into the passenger seat and slamming the door. She could not bear the gazes of the neighbors any longer. My father, Desmond, was the last to leave. He stood by the driver's side door of the moving truck, looking back at the house. He looked at the manicured lawn he used to take credit for. He looked at the big colonial windows, and then he looked at me. For the first time, the arrogance was gone. The contempt that had fueled him for 35 years had vanished. In its place was a naked, terrified realization. He realized that he had bet on the wrong child. He realized that the daughter he had thrown away was the only one who could have given him a comfortable old age. He saw his future in a cramped apartment living on a small pension, and he saw the luxury he was leaving behind. Nia. He croaked, his voice barely audible. I did not let him finish. I did not want his apology. It was too late. The rent was due, and he was spiritually bankrupt. Goodbye, Desmond, I said. He climbed into the truck, his movements slow and painful, like an old man carrying a heavy burden. The engine sputtered to life, coughing a cloud of black smoke that hung in the air. I watched as they drove away, the truck rattling down the street until it turned the corner and disappeared from view. I stood alone in the driveway for a long moment, listening to the silence. It was the first time in my life that the silence did not feel lonely. It felt clean. I turned around and walked back up the steps. I stepped inside the foyer and closed the heavy oak door with a solid final thud. I locked it. Then I walked into the kitchen, where a man in blue coveralls was waiting with a toolbox. "Are you ready for us, Ms. Green?" the locksmith asked. I smiled, looking around at my empty, quiet house. "Yes," I said. "Change every lock, front door, back door, and the garage. I want to make sure that the past never finds its way back in." The locksmith truck pulled away, leaving me alone in the driveway, and I turned to walk back into the foyer. The heavy oak door clicked shut, with the reassuring sound of a brand-new deadbolt sliding into place. I stood there for a moment, listening. The house was silent. For 35 years this hallway had been filled with the sounds of my father's booming criticism and my sister's shrill complaints. Now there was only the hum of the refrigerator and the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock. I walked through the living room where the massive portrait of Bianca used to hang. The wall was bare now, just a slightly lighter square of paint where her smiling face had once looked down on me. I ran my hand over the plaster. I thought I would feel sad. I thought I would feel the heavy weight of nostalgia or the sharp sting of loneliness that comes from severing ties with the people who raised you. But as I moved from room to room, touching the walls that I now fully and legally possessed, I felt only one thing: weightlessness. The heavy, dark cloud of my father's disapproval was gone. The toxic noise of my sister's entitlement was silenced. The air felt cleaner. The light streaming through the windows seemed brighter. For the first time in my life, this structure was not a prison of expectation. It was a blank canvas. I realized then that I was not losing a family. I was gaining a life. I wandered into the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea, drinking it out of a mug that didn't match the china set because I didn't have to impress anyone anymore. It has been 6 months since that day, and the silence from my former family has been absolute, though I do keep tabs on them. Justice moves swiftly when you have the resources to ensure it is not obstructed. Julian pleaded guilty to federal embezzlement charges to avoid a 20-year sentence. He is currently serving 5 years in a minimum security facility in upstate New York. I hear the polyester uniforms irritate his sensitive skin, and the prison food does not quite match the standards of the foie gras he used to demand. He spends his days working in the prison laundry, folding sheets for 12 cents an hour. It is the first honest physical labor he has ever done in his life, and I like to think it is building his character. My sister Bianca learned the hardest lesson of all. With her assets seized by the government as proceeds of a crime, and her husband behind bars, she was forced to enter the workforce with no degree and no skills. The last time I drove through downtown, I stopped at a red light and looked into the window of a diner on 4th Street. There she was. She was wearing a black apron and sensible shoes, clearing dirty plates from a sticky table. She looked tired. She looked humble. She was doing the very job she had mocked me for, the job she said was for people who did not matter. Life has a funny way of teaching us humility, and I hope for her sake she is finally learning the value of a dollar earned rather than stolen. And my father, Desmond, lives in a 1-bedroom subsidized apartment on the east side of the city. It is small and the heating is loud, but it is a roof over his head. I send a check every month to the management company anonymously to ensure he has groceries and heat, because unlike him, I would never leave a family member out in the cold to freeze. But I do not visit, I do not call. He sits alone with his memories and his regrets, and I think that silence is a louder punishment than anything I could ever say to him. He has to live every day, knowing that he threw away the only child who actually loved him. Tonight, I found myself back at El Obsidienne. The restaurant was buzzing with life, the crystal chandeliers casting that familiar warm glow over the white tablecloths. I sat at my usual table, the one in the center of the room, not hidden in the shadows or near the kitchen door. I wore my work jeans and my boots because I had come straight from the vineyard, and nobody looked at me with judgment. They looked at me with respect. Monsieur Laurent approached with a bottle of Vanguard Reserve, the 2018 vintage. He did not bow this time. He smiled at me like an old friend, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "To a new beginning," Madame Laurent whispered, pouring the dark red liquid into my glass. I raised the glass to the light, admiring the deep ruby color. It was the color of the earth. It was the color of hard work. It was the color of resilience. I took a sip, and it tasted better than ever before. It tasted like freedom. I learned that family is not defined by whose blood runs in your veins or whose name is on your birth certificate. It is defined by who stands by you when you are covered in dirt. It is defined by who respects you when you have nothing to offer but yourself. If you are holding on to toxic people just because they are related to you, let this be your sign to let go. You can build your own family. You can build your own empire, and you can do it all while wearing work boots. Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of truth and triumph. And remember, the best revenge is not hurting them back. It is living a life so beautiful and so authentic that they cannot even reach you to ruin it. Nia's journey reminds us that your value is never determined by those who refuse to see it. For years, her family mistook her humility for failure, but she showed us that true power does not need to be loud, it just needs to be real. The greatest revenge against those who belittle you is not cruelty, but massive, undeniable success. Family is not an obligation based on blood. It is a privilege earned through mutual respect. If this story inspired you to stand in your own power, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of resilience. Have you ever had to cut ties to find your peace? Share your story in the comments below.